On April 24th, 2023, an article written by Nathan Brown was published in the Indianapolis Star titled, "What's the Future of Indycar's Video Game Amid Motorsport Games' Financial Turmoil?" Despite Motorsport Games having over $70 million in net losses over 2 years and the uncertainty behind the company's future, Mark Miles, the president and CEO of Penske Entertainment Corporation, which oversees IndyCar and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, stated, quote, "I think it was the right decision. I know iRacing fans aren't happy, and we're not minimizing that. But the opportunity for an IndyCar title game is pretty compelling." 7 months later, if you follow sim racing, you've probably already heard about this news since the moment it broke just a couple days ago, and now it's November 16th, and not much has changed, but I'm not really making this video to just go over every little single thing about the news you already know. There's more of a point to this video that I want to talk about, like how does this news affect us as a team, me as a content creator, and whether or not iRacing and IndyCar will ever have the same license agreement that they used to have. To be honest, I'm not completely keen on making videos like this, mostly because sometimes I don't want to add to the echo chamber. I don't want to say things that have already been said or things you can just read on your own. It's not really interesting to me. But there's some things I've seen, not from a lot of people, but just from some people, that I feel I kind of want to address in some way. Okay, so let's get things out of the way first. I am not a journalist. I am simply just a sim racer, a content creator who follows the subject, and I'm interested in the subject. But since the business of content creation lacks really any institutional control or accreditation, I decided, well, I'm just going to add my 2 cents in and see what happens. Maybe I can make myself seem more credible if I have shitty local news intro, and I can claim to be some source of authority, like when I play this right here. So I'm not going to be railing against Motorsport Games this entire time, because I don't really think I need to convince you about the train wreck that company is, was, and forever will be when people make other YouTube documentaries and shorts about like this company 5-10 years from now. So all I really want to do is kind of clear up some misconceptions, some things I don't think are necessarily true or don't have any verifiable evidence to prove. I mostly want to speak to that more than anything else. And if anything else, I mostly just wanted to be a word of caution when it comes to any potential of iRacing and IndyCar ever working together in the near future. So if in case you somehow are not familiar with the story or not following the story, the news kind of broke last week, a day before the investors call, the earnings call, the Q3 earnings call for Motorsport Games, that they were shuttering the development studio located in Australia that was primarily responsible for creating the IndyCar game that they had been licensed out to by IndyCar. So it was not a surprise when that was first reported that when the earnings report came out the next day, as was required by the SEC, it simply stated the game had been suspended. So it turns out something new that we do know is that apparently hours after the earnings call ended, IndyCar itself made the decision to move to terminate the agreements. This news became public after Motorsport Games published an 8K filing on their website as required by the Securities Exchange Commission, or the SEC. In this form, it stated that IndyCar had made a decision to give notice to Motorsport Games that same day to terminate their agreement with the company. Motorsport Games stated that IndyCar terminated the agreement due to, quote, the company's alleged failure to satisfy certain of its obligations under the IndyCar license agreements, including making IndyCar Racing Series video gaming products available in the United States and facilitating a minimum number of IndyCar Racing Series esports events. What's interesting in the 8K form is that basically at the very end it states that Motorsport Games is evaluating IndyCar LLC's notice of termination, including demands for certain payments, and Motorsport Games' own options under the license agreements. So if you know anything about me, if you know anything about the team, if you know anything about the iRacing IndyCar situation, you might be thinking I'd be celebrating right now and there'd be balloons and confetti everywhere. And frankly, I'm not happy. I'm just frustrated. I'm kind of still mad, honestly. And I knew eventually that this day was going to come, and I knew I wasn't going to feel happy about it. I didn't know how I was going to feel, but I definitely knew I wasn't going to be happy. And the main reason why, and the point of this video, I really want to hit home with all of you, is that this does not really change anything when it comes to iRacing and IndyCar and licensing. it is entirely possible that we can look back on this day and see this as a catalyst for iRacing and Indycar again working together, because I don't know where else they can go. They may very well try and find a different developer, and I don't know who that would be, to try and continue this exclusive license and produce a console game. But it ultimately does not change that iRacing and IndyCar did not really have the best relationship, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Right now, I really feel for the developers who just had their studio shut down, and thus they were laid off, they were fired. And I can only imagine people get into that line of work, game development, because either they really like video games or they're really passionate about creating video games, and getting fired sucks. There's no way around that. And it's really sad, like the competence of higher management, the consequences are usually always felt by the people below. The other people I feel bad for are the people who were looking forward to this game, who feel hoodwinked in some sense that Motorsport Games is, in some ways, I feel making some false promises. And while this is a game I probably would not buy because I'm not a console gamer, I like the simulation aspect of games more, it still sucks because the whole idea was this game, according to IndyCar, was supposed to be a greater outreach to fans, and well, now they have nothing. As a fan of IndyCar, I personally feel it's embarrassing that, was it 19 years now since that last console game came out, like back in like 04, 05, that IndyCar has had no standalone games since. Zero. All that we had in between are licensing agreements with like Forza, with iRacing, and with Reza Studios as well, with Automobilista too. And in many ways, IndyCar should have never been in this position. They make this decision to go an exclusive route with Motorsport Games, a company that lost close to $70 million in revenue over 2 years, has historically held licenses for games they don't release. Just ask the British Touring Car Championship how their agreement went, just like IndyCar's. And the games that they have made have been terrible. Look at NASCAR Ignition 21, an absolutely unplayable game. So the biggest question is, well, why did they make this decision to begin with? It sounds like completely illogical for them to do this. According to the latest edition of the Racer Mailbag by Marshall Pruitt and Chris Medland, there's a question about this topic. In response to a question, Marshall Pruitt wrote, and I quote, "I've been told by quite a few folks that at least one decision maker in Penske Entertainment's leadership team has deep ties to the company in question, which, if true, would explain how they got themselves into this mess." I'm sorry, what? A decision maker in Penske Entertainment Corporation that runs the Speedway, runs the IndyCar series, runs the production team at the Speedway, had deep ties with Motorsport Games, and therefore had a vested interest to sign off or approve or vote in the affirmative for this deal. Who is that person, and how are they still employed? For me, I don't know much about business. I might be like the least business-minded person in my family. I know this is a red flag. This is unethical as all hell. So Penske Entertainment Corporation, that's a private company. It is not a publicly traded company. It has always been private, always will be. So there's nothing inherently illegal about what's going on. But think if you were running a company and you had someone either high up in leadership or like on your board of directors, and they made a decision to enter into agreement with a company that they had ties with. Now the quote doesn't say or elaborate were these financial ties, because if these are financial ties, that is incredibly shady, and I would not want that person making decisions, especially if I'm their boss. And I've never read a book in like business ethics, but I imagine if I did, this would be like a textbook example of like, if you make a decision like this because you have a vested interest, according to the words of Marshall Pruitt, how can you have like any independent decision making? That honestly sounds, it could be very harmful for your company. And well, guess what? It has been, because IndyCar doesn't have the game out that they wanted to have out in 2023. And Lord knows if they'll have it out in 2024 with another developer. So by IndyCar making this decision in the first place, I feel in a lot of ways is just peak hubris. They walked away from an established partner in iRacing, yes, one they had a rather acrimonious relationship with, and also, don't forget, also walked away from Reza Studios as well, because they were on the precipice of releasing their iRacing back in November of 2022 before they suddenly had to stop for seemingly mysterious reasons, which were then very much cleared up in the next month. So in my view, IndyCar made this decision to not renew their license with iRacing, a whole separate thing not related to the exclusive license of Motorsport Games, which was negotiated on its own back in July of 2021. It's an entirely separate issue. Both of these things could have coexisted together. IndyCar just decided to walk away from iRacing. As for what exactly the reason was, I don't know the answer. And probably the only people who know the answer are those people who work for IndyCar or Penske Entertainment Corporation or iRacing, and they're not going to publicly say what the beef was, because if they do, that's really burning the bridge at this point. Maybe right now the bridge has been bombed. You can still repair the bridge, but if you talk publicly about it, that bridge is burned and nothing's ever going to happen again between the two sides. I've read a lot of rumors, I've heard a lot of things as to what those reasons could have been. They're not verifiable, I'm not going to repeat them. That would frankly not be prudent. But one of the few instances of this discord becoming public were the drivers being quite critical of the tire model. And for the record, I think the drivers were right. In terms of the tire model on the IndyCar, there does need to be a lot of improvement. And on the road side in particular, actually there was improvement. So is this what killed their partnership? No, of course not. There is absolutely no way that's what eventually ended the relationship. But it is the one example that showcases the tension between iRacing and IndyCar, and there was not any love lost between the two sides. The point of me saying all of these things is to raise the question of whether or not iRacing and IndyCar can resume their partnership in 2024. The answer is they could. Will they? That's the bigger question. I sadly do not think that they will. And believe me, I want to be wrong. To borrow the words of Marshall Pruitt, I have a vested interest to be wrong, because I would like for my team, and I myself would like to once again race in the iRacing Indianapolis 500, and I would like to see our team win a 5th straight. We've won 4 straight from 2019 to 2022. We wanted to have that drive for 5, so to speak. I do feel that ultimately IndyCar decided not to renew the agreement basically over spite, and it primarily hurt the fans more than anybody else. And thinking back in the history of IndyCar, I'm trying to remember what were some other decisions made by this same governing body that were also kind of spiteful and only hurt the fans, and also kind of set the sport back decades too. I remember 1996. So it's for those reasons I'm not very optimistic, but again, I hope I'm wrong. I really do hope I'm wrong. And the other reason I'm not optimistic too is when you look at the 8K filing on the Motorsport Games website, it does say at the bottom that Motorsport Games is essentially exploring options as to what to do next. When they say what to do next, I don't know what that means. I feel like the headlines from a couple of the news articles, and these are outlets I respect, I have nothing wrong with these actual journalists like Nathan Brown and Mike Straw at Insider Gaming, but when I look at it, I don't think this is over yet. I'm not saying they're saying it's over either, but this is just how I kind of see it. If Motorsport Games owes IndyCar money, and Motorsport Games only has so much cash on hand according to the Q3 earnings, which I don't remember the exact number, I'll have it up in the video here, the chess move might be, so to speak, disclaimer, I am not a lawyer, but which would be less expensive? Make it the payment, or perhaps going to court and delaying for a little bit? Again, I'm not going to pretend to tell you how the legal system works. I'm not a lawyer, but that's the one way I kind of looked at it from like a game theory perspective, so to speak. I don't know. I'm trying to look at this objectively. So when you think about this scenario, which I don't think is entirely implausible, it's November right now. This could carry on for a couple months. Do you think there's time? I suppose there could be time, but do you think there's time enough to get an agreement in place to have an iRacing Indy 500? If iRacing and IndyCar want to work together, it appears one side might not want to. And as I've said, I want to be wrong. I want to run the race again, but I am not really optimistic. I think the one thing we can agree on is that these exclusive licenses are terrible for consumers. I personally feel that exclusive licenses like this are anti-competitive. I know by saying that, it's not anti-competitive in the sense it doesn't violate US antitrust law, but it does hurt the consumers because it does not give us a free choice of the product we want to buy. The only free choice we have is to simply not buy a product. I mean, one only has to look towards like the Madden NFL games and see what happened in those series. There was no incentive to make those games better because EA had the exclusive license for those games. One of the things I've always talked about when it came to this news, when it happened back in December of 2022, was I actually would not mind if Motorsport Games as an entity made their own games and not under an exclusive license. In fact, I would welcome it. In my heart and in my blood, I bleed IndyCar. I love IndyCar racing. If not for iRacing and IndyCar, I would not have made the friends I have today, and I probably would never have gone to the Indianapolis 500. And I know I'm just one fan out of hundreds of thousands that attended the Indy 500 back in May this year, but the point of it is, it inspired me in some ways, or it compelled me in some ways to eventually go one day. And that's what this game could have done too, if it ever actually got released, and it's not going to get released. Historically, IndyCar has had productive relationships with developers like iRacing, like Forza Motorsports, and like Reza Studios as well. But especially with iRacing, they had an incredibly productive relationship on both sides. They both benefited from each other in early 2020, during the COVID period, when they were having those IndyCar challenge races that were being broadcasted on TV, I believe, and then also on their YouTube channel. The disappointing nature of IndyCar's decision is that ultimately they hurt themselves. For one, in some ways being swindled, in my opinion, by Motorsport Games, but also their relationships ending with both iRacing and Reza Studios. It's true, perhaps Motorsport Games had a lot of promise. There was a lot of money behind it initially, but over time, it proved that the business model just was not really sustainable in a number of different areas. Motorsport Games is, in my opinion, in serious jeopardy by having the BTCC license terminated, by having IndyCar move to terminate their exclusive license, and having to sell their NASCAR exclusive license to iRacing, seemingly just to keep their company afloat. The only thing that's going to be released by Motorsport Games in the near future is Le Mans Ultimate, which was pushed back to February of 2024. And the fact that they're making all these massive across-the-board budget cuts, they ended Traction, which if you didn't know, was owned by MSGM, and lots of other areas too, including, cutting ties with the development company in Australia, simply just to make ends meet, and they're quite clearly pushing all the chips in. They're going all in on this game. I think how Le Mans Ultimate does will be make or break for this company, and honestly, it may be too late to even matter. Ultimately, the Motorsport Games experience is going to cause real racing series to kind of shy away from working with developers and publishers, and ultimately that harms sim racing, and that's what makes me frustrated about this whole thing. I legitimately feel bad that IndyCar got burned. I guess now they understand how they burned me and how they burned other fans too. This really is the moment for IndyCar to reconsider their approach and think about how they want to handle things going forward. I'm hoping that they can learn from this experience and treat their fans better, but I'm not optimistic about that either. So to conclude, I want to state again, all of this news, it could eventually be the catalyst for a return of a partnership or a licensee relationship of some kind. But as of right now, anyone speculating that this will return next year or that the boys will be back in 24, they're doing so without evidence. Again, like I said, I hope they're right, because I want to see us in victory lane again in the iRacing Indianapolis 500. I want to thank you for watching this video. Hopefully I provided a different perspective than other people have been giving. I mostly just wanted to update everyone as to what this actually means for iRacing and IndyCar, because I don't think most people have kind of talked about that aspect too much. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments if there's anything you want to elaborate on, or if you'd like to make some points of your own, or potentially, if we're living in a fantasy world, now that Motorsport Games is seemingly out of the fold for now, who would you like in a perfect world to make an IndyCar console game? Hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you next time.